welcome to Mayborn attendees. I love this conference. My name is Kevin MERIDA, and I'll be your moderator today. We have a great discussion panel of sports and social justice, framing athletes as advocates. I am joined by my colleagues and friends here. We got the distinguished Bill RHODEN, who's a longtime sports columnist at the New York Times, and author of books. One you may recognize, $40 Million Slaves, The Rise, Fall, and Redemption of the Black Athlete. Bill is a columnist for the Undefeated now and writer at large, and is also the director of a really important program for us, the RHODEN Fellows, who were named after him, intended to essentially develop the next crop of Black sports journalists. And we anchored on the HBCU campuses, and it's really been a great program for us. And so we're happy to have Bill. Give him a wave, Bill. There you go. And then we have my guy, Mark Spears, who is a senior NBA writer for the Undefeated. He's been in the bubble. I want to say he's been in the bubble seemed like a year, but it's been a while. But Mark Spears has been doing a great job at the bubble. He's a longtime NBA writer, worked in many places around the country, some fantastic relationships in the league. And we're lucky to have him, join us. He's also the author of a new book out, and we'll get into that a little bit and allow him to tell you a little bit about that. The Spencer Haywood Rule, Battles Basketball in the Making of an American Iconoclast. So with that, let's just, have a little informal discussion, because these guys know everything. Let me just throw out this first, just a question. I mean, we're having a tremendous moment, obviously, after George Floyd's killing, and the NBA operating the bubble has brought activism down there. This is obviously not anything new for athletes, but maybe just start with you, Mark, of just what that has been like. What has been you think how the athletes have tried to use their influence in the NBA bubble, and has it been successful?
First of all, I got to give both of you guys respect, man. I mean, Mr. RHODEN is a journalism legend, and I call him Mr. RHODEN all the time.
I know. I know.
You don't want that name.
And he's just somebody that's special, near and dear to me, and he has certainly opened doors for a lot of writers, man. So thank you for everything you've done. And
thanks,
if you
Mark.
don't know who this man is, he's deeper than that book, $40 Million Slaves. He's done a lot more than that. So he definitely deserves his flowers. And boss man, Kevin, man, love him. He gave me this opportunity at the Undefeated I'll never, ever forget. And I thank him for it all the time. And he's just a special human being who made history with our site. And so just thank you for both of you guys, everything that you're doing. You guys are legends, and thank you. To answer your question, Kevin, I just think that the one thing that the bubble has offered is a platform for the player that might not be the superstar. Like when LeBron James hits push on a Twitter, probably like 40, 50 million people see it. But what about the guy that, might be the third or fourth wheel on the team, or the guy coming off the bench, or the 15th man? Are you listening to them even if they have something deep to say? And so the one thing I've noticed since the moment I got here is that there have been some amazing voices who may not be the guy that's going to get you 30 points a game. I think George Hill, when the books are all written, when the documentaries are done, this Bucks guard is going to be somebody that's going to be talked about a lot. The week that the players ended up having a work stoppage, because of protesting Jacob Blake. I think George was one of the main people that started it. What happened with Blake happened on a Sunday. On Monday, after the game, Bucks won playoff game against the Magic, and George Hill's like, I don't want to talk about hoop. I'm tired of these crooked ass cops. I don't know why we're here. And that's when I started thinking like, wow, it's going to be an interesting week. Then from that, Doc Rivers spoke, and then, I ended up talking to some guys from the Raptors and from the Celtics, and they had met that, Tuesday night thinking about not playing. But George Hill just constantly stayed in my mind. And then I remember that Wednesday, I believe it was like August 26th, George Hill had a meeting with the coaching staff of the Bucks and said, I'm not playing. I'm just not playing. I'm sorry. But I'll be there in support of you guys, but I'm not playing, man. I can't play under the circumstances of this world. And his stand ended up sparking Sterling Brown, another guy who, played sparingly, dealt with some police brutality in Milwaukee. He decided not to play. And then the team as a whole decided not to play. That domino effect ended up obviously affecting the Magic, affected the rest of the games that night. It shut down the NBA for like 3 days. WNBA followed, Major League Baseball followed, NHL, Naomi Osaka, the tennis star, they all followed because I think George Hill lit the match. And I think it was then that the NBA players realized that people are listening to us, that our voices do matter, that we can use this platform for great. And also they refocused and started thinking about something tangible that they can work on now, which is voting. So I've heard probably over the last month and a half more about voting, getting people registered than before. And I think that, there have been a lot of players that if it wasn't for this bubble, maybe they wouldn't be heard. We've heard a lot about Jaylen Brown and, Fred VanVleet. No, those are sizable names. But if they weren't here, would you have heard them? And I think the bubble has given a lot of players on a regular basis, like Solomon Hill, who doesn't play much for Miami, is saying great things, has said some great things. Udonis Haslem. This bubble has afforded everybody to use their platform to the highest level.
So just want to follow up before I turn to Bill, because the bubble is a very contained environment. To just explain to people, you're known to develop relationships. And I know because I've been out with you and the way you grab guys and hallways and you might after the games and lots of ways to develop relationships for all the writers out there. And you have a reputation for really doing that. And here we're in a very confined kind of period, right? They're confined, the restricted access. So maybe tell those out there who are looking at, from just a craft standpoint, how have you gone about your job to be able to still, with the restrictions, to report the stories? And you continue to report some tremendous stories out of the bubble, but maybe talk about that process.
I had to take my creativity to a higher level. The one thing that is very tough for me, like you mentioned, that I'm a people person. I talk to people. I like going in the locker room, getting guys before games, or getting them at shoot around on the side, or getting them as they walk out to the bus. All that's canceled here. Can't do it. You have to get clearance from teams to talk to everybody. So getting a one-on-one with a LeBron James or Anthony Davis, a Jimmy Butler, especially at this point, is really, really hard. It was easier before in the beginning because there was 22 teams. It was a gluttonous of stuff. But as teams started departing, it got harder and harder, and the NBA started putting more and more clamps on availability. So I just decided I got to be more creative, like getting stuff like I got on Myers Leonard, who, Myers Leonard is a white player who stood during the anthem, put his hand on his heart, respecting the military in his mind, but also was wearing a Black Lives Matter T-shirt. So I thought for the Undefeated audience, it would be fascinating to hear what this young man, his view on the world is, and also what he's learned over the last 2.5 months. I'd say that story because, I think that's a more creative story to do. That's thinking outside the box. So if you are in an environment where you are going to be limited to what you do, and I get it for COVID reasons and other stuff, and perhaps they're taking advantage of it a little bit, which, PR people can do when you give them such power. I've just had to try to figure out a way to just be even more creative than before.
Well,
Interesting.
turn to Bill, who, we're looking at this time when there's been a lot of attention about athletes and whether or not, what kind of influence can they leverage? How do they go about using that influence? What is their power? If you look back because you've studied this, the arc of history and what athletes have done to move issues forward, how do you think about this moment in the context of change throughout American history?
Yeah. Well, this is unprecedented. Before I kind of get started, just want to acknowledge, both of you, but Mark, man, you've done great work in the years we've both been at the Undefeated, but you've taken it to a whole nother level, man. I mean, I don't know what kind of medal that we could give you. I don't know if it's a Pulitzer or whatever, man, but your work has been phenomenal. Gold medal, but it's been phenomenal, man. You've been heroic, and
Thank you. That means
man, you keep saying more and more, but I think as a journalist, there's a part of me that's envious of you because this is heroic. I mean, this is not heroic, but this is a unique circumstance. As long as, I don't know, Kevin, as long as we've been doing this, this is unprecedented. This whole thing is just unprecedented. So the historian in me is like, wow, man, it'd be great to be there. Now, the senior citizen in me said, well, I'm glad I'm up here, but just your work, man, I just want to acknowledge that, man, your work, your insight, the stuff you did on the bus, when you had your camera on the bus, when there was like the people were blocking the way. And I heard some of it, and it was so classic, man. It's like, and this is for students too, while everybody else, some of your colleagues were complaining and they wanted to get home, you had the presence of mind that knowing this was like historic, this is news, and you shot it, and you can hear in the background some people like complaining, like, oh man, which is just so telling about our craft, predominantly dominated by white guys. And I don't want to indict people, but it's just great having you there and setting the tone. So thank you. And then just Kevin, you are a believer, man. It's just been great, for you to see this moment and unleash MARC, and just send them down there, make that commitment that, hey, man, we've got to have a presence there, So it's just, and just in general, just been great having you both as colleagues, man. This is really great, really, really great. And just in terms of the moment, this is, such an unprecedented moment, and, before we've had individual people, you had, Jack Johnson, who was less of a radical. He was just, his protest was how white people are treating me. It's not like he wasn't really concerned with the whole of the black community. In fact, he told both black and white to kiss my ass, and it's, and even Smith and Carlos and Ali, these were individual things. And I think that what we were all waiting for was what happens when in a team sport, because, and Jordan had kind of set the tone for neutrality, for a whole generation. He said, the tone he set was, hey, listen, man, just keep your mouth shut, make the money, make as much money as you can, stay neutral, that kind of stuff. I think what's been the beauty of this is that it's been the team, it's been the team, all these brothers and sisters, because the WNBA has done a remarkable job. The women in the WNBA have really, I could even argue, have really led this charge. I mean, they have been fearless, and not just this year. They've been fearless for years. But you know what, Kevin and Mark, it's almost as if, remember the whole thing, what's that, Brer Rabbit, and the guy said, "Don't throw me in the briar patch," and where he wants to go is in the briar patch. So you put all these black folks in this contained bubble where all they could think of is what? Revolution and ball, and just how pissed off we are at all this stuff. You know, the pandemic, who kind of put us in this position, who's running this country, the police brutality, all this stuff. And, you know, when you have a bunch of, you know, young black people and white people who kind of like, who are their allies for the most part, thinking about this stuff, you've got this combustion. So I think that's what's really been, and then of course, I think, you know, LeBron, man, and I'm sure we'll get into that later, but he single-handedly has given these black athletes back their voice. I think is a voice that Michael sort of, in his leadership, quieted or encouraged to be quiet. I think LeBron has really collectively given people their voice back. So this is just a great time. The only question I have, Mark, and I guess we could talk about, is that what happens now? I mean, you know, now it's over, and I'm eager to say, you know, I'm eager to see, Kevin, what happens after the bubble, after everybody disperses. Now what happens?
Well, yeah, and look, I think you raise a great point for us to discuss, because, you know, I sometimes think the most overused phrase in the modern English language is "I'm using my platform."
Right.
Fill in the blank, you know, and by that, a lot of times that means being on social media and speaking out. And I think a lot of the questions, and this is not just limited to athletes, but they're prominent, right? Athletes and celebrities, people who are on television shows, and musicians, and people who have command a certain level of fame, notoriety, attention. There is an expectation there. And part of, you know, there's one thing to use the platform and speak out, and there's another thing of where does the change happen? Because the change often, whether it's in policing or in improving the quality of schools, or, you know, broadly systemic racism, that's hard work. We got lots of organizations going after that work. And so the question I would have you guys is, how does it get translated from simply speaking out and having shirts on their back and
right.
Black Lives Matter on the court to the kind of change that is changing systems and structures, and whether or not athletes can influence that, and if they can, how do they? Because obviously they have full-time jobs, and those jobs they're playing in very competitive, some of the most competitive job markets exist, right? Like 400 NBA players or plus. So if you get to be one of those, you know, that's a very competitive job market, and it takes a lot to stay there. That said, you know, now that people are expressing their opinion and jumping into this, how does that translate into the kind of change that organizations and other people are working on this as their full-time job? Anybody, both of you.
Go ahead, Mark.
Well, that's I think a great topic, because I've been kind of trying to follow what I hear from guys when they leave, and I can't say I've heard a ton, and I think part of it is probably mental fatigue and even protest fatigue.
Right.
I think like once I get out of here, boss man, I'm disappearing. You know what I mean? And I think you guys both understand.
Right? You personally are disappeared, right?
Yeah, I'm like just disappeared, man.
I won't be able to find you. So,
man, I'm gonna disappear, and I feel like some of those guys have disappeared because of fatigue, and they got to get their mind back. And you know, but I had a chance to talk to C.J. McCollum the other day, and he's still beating the drum, and Carmelo Anthony, you hear from him, and you know, Chris Paul, and you know, Harrison Barnes, and So now I think after you go home and you take your breath, they're starting to feel like, okay, the election's about to come up. What can I do in my community to help? I saw that More Than a Vote has got, like, I want to say Lyft involved, where perhaps they could get, free rides for people who you want to go vote at one of these arenas. You could get a free ride to and from, which I think is phenomenal, because that's one thing I was thinking, like, what if you can't get there, and could some of these stadiums and arenas that are being used perhaps maybe cause other polling places to be closed? So I do feel like it's gotten a little quiet, but there's gonna be a sigh of relief, and then an extra push as we get closer to the election. And LeBron James talked about it today, about how, that he is confident that once the players leave the bubble, that they'll take that energy that they have in here and bring it into their own communities.
Mm-hmm. And, I'm also wondering, and it's more of a question, a statement, but to me, the players have almost gone as far as they can go in terms of doing what they can do and all that. Now, to me, you got to have these multi-billionaires who own the teams, who run the league, who've got that muscle, billionaires speaking to billionaires, when they go to the Hamptons. And these are people, some of whom support the president. To me, it's time really for these multi-billionaires, and I'm not just talking about throwing money at stuff. You could do that. You could throw money at stuff, but now you really need muscle. You need the muscle of multi-billionaires to put pressure on mayors, to put pressure on state's attorneys, to put pressure on the people who run the police, the police unions. And I don't know, and I wanted to talk to you about that, Mark, because again, I think the players have gone pretty much as far as they can go, but they're not multi-billionaires. They're not in those same rooms for the most part. They don't have those kind of conversations, like I said, in the Hamptons, when you go to these when you go to these fundraisers. So that's what I think the next level of the struggle. I mean, I think LeBron's going to do what he has to do, and other players, are going to do what they have to do. But they have gone, I think, as far as they can go. You now need the muscle and leverage of these multi-billionaires to take the struggle and fight to another level. Don't know if you agree with that or not, but that's where I think that we are. That they are.
Let me ask you both. Given that we are at a writers' conference, to talk about craft. Both of you all are really smart, both about story ideas and framing, and discuss how you frame these subjects, how you go about reporting and writing what often are really complex stories, and on race, culture, about activism and presenting Black athletes, particularly in ways in which maybe they're not always seen. So talk about craft a little bit.
Go ahead, Bill.
I guess we start off talking about history. For me, it's always been history. It's always been understanding the history of things, to understand how things are connected. It's almost like an ongoing novel, how one generation connects to the other generation. I've been listening to this tremendous biography of Alain Locke, the New Negro, and who is talking about this empowerment, like in the 20s, 30s, and some of these same issues, and about how do we define ourselves as Black writers and Black people. And remember, back then, we didn't have the extra weaponry of a big athletic community that we've got now. Back then, you may have had like a Joe Louis or Jack, but now you've got this whole culture of young Black millionaire athletes now. And how do we basically put them into the struggle. I think, so you asked me, so I'm thinking, okay, that's always been fascinating to me. So, okay, now this piece was missing. Now we've got this piece. And how do we use this army, this young army of young, talented, highly visible young black men and women? How do they add their voices to the struggle? And I think that one of the things that's been fascinating is how I think they're trying to find their place. You know, they're trying to find, how do we use the struggle? And so you got a guy like George Hill, and he says, oh, we can just unplug it because, we can just unplug it, and you saw, man, when he unplugged it, all of a sudden, everybody was all ears because they realized that we're the show. If we don't play, there's no show. They don't want to see the owner of the Clippers play. They want to see us. And it's the same thing. So just to answer your question, Kevin, just as a journalist, my approach has almost been sort of looking at the evolution of all this stuff, how this stuff evolves. And I guess because I've been a columnist for most of my career, it's whether it's being a jazz critic when I was in the Baltimore Sun today, I've always seen those two worlds collided. You've got all these tremendous jazz musicians who had a consciousness, but they didn't necessarily have the money. And now in the other world of sports, you've got all these guys who got the money. They are now just kind of getting the consciousness. So I'm just fascinated by how do we seize power and control?
Mm-hmm. That's well put. Mark, you're always coming up with really fascinating story ideas. I'd be here all day ticking them off, but like I remember back when just the simple thing of what is it like to be black in Utah, or sometimes opening up kind of the aperture, like where you get to see someone like Jaylen Brown, who's really well read, people don't really know how he studies, and you bring that kind of dimension, some of the diaries, Fred VanVleet, so you're really coming with different approaches. So talk a little bit of just about your own kind of writers, reporters mentality.
A lot of times I'll just, it's weird, Kevin, I'll just sit and think quietly, and I'll like look at the standings, and I'll be like, okay, Clippers. Think about the guys on the Clippers and try to think about what each person, like, because I believe everybody has a story. And okay, that person from Lou Williams is interesting. He actually went to Atlanta for a funeral of a man who was a great black businessman. No one's telling that story. Let me tell that. Okay, Denver Nuggets. Michael Porter Jr., mixed race, pretty outspoken for a young kid. Let me put that on the list. And so a lot of times I'll just sit and think and go through the roster and come up with stuff that, perhaps could be interesting and try to get to it at some point. I really feel like everybody has a story. You just got to find it. So I try to read up on everybody's background, where they're from, who they're connected to, their family. And a lot of times, man, you'll be surprised, what you find. So it's just sometimes you just got to be quiet and introspective, and then other times it's like, all right, I'm trying to make this gumbo, and I ain't got no andouille sausage, got a little bit of chicken and no shrimp, but I got some crab meat. How do you make the best of it? How do you make it taste better? I do have some filet, like Myers Leonard, like I mentioned, like finding that story, or talking to Phil Handy, an assistant coach with the Lakers, about, Kobe and his relationship with Kobe Bryant. Talking to Udonis Haslem and him telling me, hey, man, I'm eating chunky soup every day. Udonis Haslem ain't played this playoffs, but he's an integral vocal part for the Heat. And so no player is off limits, man. I mean, you could write. It's easy to get the LeBron clicks, but how do you get the UD clicks? You know what I mean? Like, so I just try to like, man. Kevin, Mr. Rowe, you guys know, man. I'm just a weird off the beaten path thinker, man. like I always just like, yeah, that's interesting. You know, and make something out, try to make something out of a molehill, because I've never wanted to be the guy, and you guys know this from covering the playoffs. Like, I don't want to go with the herd and do everything that the herd is doing. Everybody's going to write about LeBron. No, like, if everybody's going through the green door, I want to go through the red door and find something fascinating. They're like, man, how did you? Yeah, because I'm just trying to be wired different and think about something that's fascinating that perhaps everybody's looking at that glowing light and aren't paying attention to the blinking one, but the blinking one has a great story too.
Yeah, and it's a great lesson that you know, that a lot of the best stories are certainly those that are untold, but that are not like always the stories that we're right in front of where the bright lights are shining. You know, Bill, you do a great job of bringing perspective. You know, it always, a lot of times when we're looking for like context and background, and it's also maybe part of it is not only of you being around long enough to see a lot of the stuff, but just but experience matters, right?
Yeah.
But it's not only that though. It's the sense that history is important, that you need to know what came before, so that everything is not always new. And I think a lot of times when we're in any kind of coverage, and particularly with race, we're looking at and we're talking to people who are right here and now without knowing, wait a minute, somebody else did this before. You know, right. Can you talk about like your process when you're thinking about? I remember, you know, Colin Kaepernick is also a great, you know, he did something that was very simple, right? Like he kneeled, you know, first to make a lot of noise about it, and it like shook the fabric of the biggest and most important league and fans and everything that happened on a Sunday where you have this huge audience. But that way in which, in some of the columns and things that you wrote after that, brought in all kinds of other dimensions of athletes. So maybe talk a little bit about your thinking in that regard.
You know, one of the things that kind of takes off to something that Mark was talking about, and we've actually talked about it too when we brainstorm ideas. I guess I'm really into exploring the hypocrisy of our country, of our nation. That to me is fascinating. The hypocrisy of a democracy, of a front-facing democracy built on the backs of 40 million slaves. That has been an ongoing, unresolved source of, whether it's in sports or whatever, it just pops up everywhere. And I'm always, it just intrigues me, but also I'm always looking for the hypocrisy of things. And even to this thing, you know, we talk about, you know, while Mark is looking for off the beaten path, I guess I'm looking to attack. Well, what's the issue here? What's the angle here? This is how we get back to this flawed foundation, you know, where rather than us going back and said, we're going to excavate that foundation and make it all even, we can't do that. We're just going to keep building on top of it. And so here we are. Well, that's why they keep killing. So, and then I guess the challenge, and so how does that relate to our industry, which is sports? Well, I think that when you got all these black folks in our most popular, you know, football, basketball, where this nation eats, breathes, and all that, and it's create this dilemma for a lot of white fans. You know, it's the dilemma. It's an American dilemma. It's like, damn, we don't really value these black folks, but here they are. They are the foundation of these things that we love. How do we deal with that? So that that's always intrigues me, you know. And I just think in terms of if you're a young person in this business, you have to just, you can't, like you're saying, Kevin, nothing started yesterday, you know. And what I was trying to tell you, even the fellows, you know, I asked them, you know, they kind of blow off history. I said, why do you think athletes spend 99% of their time watching game film? Why do you think they spend 99% of their time watching game film? They're not watching anything that has to do with tomorrow. Everything they watch, yesterday's practice, last year's game. Why do you think their coaches have them spending so much time looking at the past? And then they say, well, because it helps us prepare, learn our mistakes. What do we do wrong? Why do we keep getting beat here? Everything has to do with helping us prepare for the future, tomorrow's game. And that's sort of my approach. You know, I don't just like history just for the hell of history, you know, or telling, you always also got to sit down telling war stories. I'm like, no, man, how does that relate to the struggle at hand? You know, if you can't make that connection, then you just wasted everybody's time. So I don't know if I answered your question, but that's
that was a fantastic answer. So Mark, let me ask you, because you have a brand new book out, you know, written with Boston Globe writer Gary Washburn, the Spencer Haywood Rule. Tell us about that, because now you had to shift.
Yeah.
You obviously know basketball, and this is your first time book. How did you get yourself in the mind to do that? And obviously Spencer Haywood, just as a figure, plays into this conversation about, you know, what we're talking about Black athletes and activism and pushing the envelope. So tell us about that process of shifting from your day-to-day beat to do this book on Spencer Haywood.
Well, for those who don't know, you know, Spencer Haywood is a Hall of Famer who certainly had an interesting life and career. He was born in rural Mississippi, picked cotton as a child, basically left Mississippi to save his life, ended up becoming a basketball star in Detroit and playing in the '68 Olympics, going out from a junior college during a time where several athletes like Kareem Abdul-Jabbar opted not to play in the Olympics for political reasons and racial reasons. He also ended up fighting the NBA to have the right to go pro without staying 4 years in school, and won a Supreme Court hearing and working to do that. Haywood also played for the Lakers Magic's first year, but ended up getting kicked off the team because of drug reasons. So he didn't get that ring. He was married to Oman. He was a fascinating basketball player. I think first year he averaged 32 points and 24 rebounds or something crazy like that. Just a lot when you tell his story, man. It's probably worthy of a 30 for 30 documentary. And he's one of the great storytellers for anybody. Like, when you guys get your book, if you haven't already, man, it's just the easiest read because you feel like you're just sitting down with him, having a glass of wine, and he's just telling you a bunch of stories, man. So I actually was in Vegas last year for Summer League, and when I did have some free time, I sat with him for 5 hours over the course of 3 days, each day, and just told him to tell me his story, and split the book with Gary Washburn, and he wrote the rest. And seems like it's getting a really good reviews so far. People are liking it, and somebody told me it was such a good read. They read it in a day.
Wow.
Okay. That's great.
Congratulations.
But there's a lot of
getting
racial
my copy.
stuff.
I'm going to Amazon and order my copies, and gonna give one to my dad too. So
I appreciate it.
So Bill, this question is gonna go to you too, Mark. Is there a story that you would like to do that it's just been too difficult to do? You know, is there, you know, and you know, this is something that you really want to pursue, but you haven't quite, you know, been able to figure it out, you know, because that's part of the process. We all have a lot of ideas of like, how do we get at the stories? What is the story you like to get at, but haven't quite figured out how to get at it?
Yeah, well, that's
doesn't have to be so specific. Could be in a general range, because if we're going to get it at the Undefeated, I don't want you to give it away.
Yeah,
but
that's what I'm saying. You're killing me.
but I'm thinking of, you know, just, you know, there are a lot of topics that are really hard. And I'm always one to push I think the best writers, the best among us, should do the most difficult work. And I think that's always the ideal, to go after the stuff that's really hard. Because, you know, the stuff that's easy, let somebody else do that work. You know, if you want to really be the best, take on the most difficult challenges. And so what are some things that you, either one of you, both of you, that you think is a challenge in and I'm gonna say in this area of race, sports, culture, the intersections?
I would like to have a sit down, or maybe even on the golf course with Michael Jordan, man. And I know that's he doesn't do a lot of talking.
Yeah.
But I would love to like be in his environment, be in that room you saw on The Last Dance where he had a glass of whiskey, man, you know, sit there with him and just kind of really talk to him about his career, his life. Just see if you can get him to open up. And because I talked to Ahmad Rashad about Jordan, he's like, you ain't gonna hear from him no more. The Last Dance was the last interview, but that would be one interview I would love to have. It's just an opportunity to even maybe spend like 48 hours with him.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. What about you, Bill?
That's a loaded question, Kevin. In fact, I've been meaning to call you to talk it through. Yeah, in fact, it's a book I'm working on. So but I guess just generally, man, without giving, you know, just generally, what's the next level of this struggle? What's the next level? I mean, everybody's talked about activism and all this. Where is this all going? You know, we've got this election coming up, and I'm thinking for some reason, I'm looking at that as a critical turning point, and how I see my fellow Americans. You know, will they sustain my faith in them? You know, so I mean, there's a lot going through my head when you ask that. I'm already thinking about projects that I do that I got to think through. So I said, damn, that reminds me, I got to call Kevin, because you're great at thinking through these puzzles. So that's I could have been on a debate the other day, because I'm giving you a non-answer answer. But may I ask one thing for you guys? It's kind of getting hardcore basketball, but this is one thing. Mark, you've been down there, and Kevin, you're a basketball connoisseur. Is the basketball better? Are we seeing something? I know it's unique, but is this basketball better? Is it better because it's all just basketball? And then B, does LeBron finally catapult Jordan once he wins his fourth title with 3 different teams? You know, I say yes, but I'm just. So those are 2 questions.
Now you're starting to. We'd be here another hour. We're down
to
the last 5 minutes.
That's our first bar conversation after we get out of here.
We need a whole hour. We're getting right down to the wire. But you know what? I'm gonna take the bait and give you 1 minute. I'm gonna take the bait and give you 1 minute, because this is really an hour-long thing.
Right.
You know, there are some things about the bubble that I like to enjoy as a fan, but I do miss the pressure, the additional extra pressure of fans and the environment and the screaming and just the ambiance of it. I do think that adds a dimension to being in the finals and and I wish we would come back to that. On Jordan, I it's hard for me to think that Jordan. I'm going to say Jordan is Jordan. He's still the same guy. He's still the greatest ever.
I will say the basketball is better here because they're not traveling.
Yeah,
they're not getting on planes. There's not as many distractions. It's just basketball, and I think the players really, really love it. And I actually thought there was going to be a ton of injuries, and I was completely wrong. And I think it's because they've been in one place. They're just more and more rested. So when the NBA world and the whole world gets better, I anticipate the schedule changing where it's like, okay, you're an East Coast team. You're going to play Phoenix, and then you're going to go up to L.A., and when you're in L.A., you're going to play the Lakers and the Clippers, and then you're going to fly an hour and a half up to the Bay. You're going to play the Warriors, and then take a hour and a half bus to Sacramento, kind of like baseball. Take something out of them, and I think that will help continue to get the players more rested. I've seen games where a team will play the Warriors, fly to Phoenix to play Phoenix, and then go up and play Sacramento. And that just, I understand there might be concerts or something in a way, but to me, that hurts the game, that hurts the players. They got to figure out a way to, you don't have to make 4 trips to LA, make 2 trips to LA, although the players might like 4, make one, long one. And so I think that's going to help make it better. But to Kevin's point, like not having the fans, even though it's the finals, it doesn't feel like the finals. I was saying to somebody, man, I wish that game was in Miami. Not just from a social standpoint, but just I love the energy of the finals. When you go to the game, there's this buzz, and it's just the energy and the crowd. And, you hear them cheering early, except in Miami, they show up late. So I like that, too, that they show up late. But to answer your other question, man, I think beauty is in the eye of the beholder. And it always amazes me that Magic Johnson is never put into this equation. And in my opinion, I think Magic Johnson is the greatest player that ever lived. But I guess that over the course of this conversation, I told you I'm an off the beaten path guy anyway.
I love
deep
Magic.
in the bush.
He was my favorite player, coming up and watching him. So I think we got to leave it at that. This has been a great conversation. I enjoyed being with you guys as I always do. I'll look forward to having you back, Mark, when you get out of the bubble, and Bill, great seeing you. So Mark Spears, Bill RHODEN, and to everybody out there in Mayborn land, it's fantastic. Best writers conference in the country. Thanks a lot, and see you next time.
Thank you.